And let's start with global stories. Former Uber CEO Travis Kalanick has named 2 new directors without consulting company's new leader or other existing board members. Kalanick said in an announcement that he had appointed Ursula Burns, Xerox former CEO, and John Thain, the ex-Merrill Lynch chief, to startup's board. While Kalanick has asserted that these were required, an appointment is a complete surprise, Uber has said. And Ursula Burns is ex-Xerox CEO. He has been appointed director. And John Thain is ex-Merrill Lynch CEO. He is also among directors. And Uber has challenged appointments, calling them a complete surprise. The former CEO is defending himself against a lawsuit brought by Uber's largest shareholder, Benchmark, over his authority to fill the 2 board seats. Kalanick says he controls 3 of company's 11 board seats. Benchmark is suing Kalanick for fraud and has asked him to relinquish control of board positions. The suit is in private arbitration. Kalanick resigned as CEO on June 20 this year after Benchmark and a group of early investors asked him to step down. Uber's board has been rife with infighting and underwent a continuous process to select former Expedia CEO Dara Khosrowshahi as its new chief. Uber expressed concern at Kalanick's announcement as well. And moving to South Korea, where the exports have surged to a record last month in the latest sign that stronger global trade is helping to underpin growing momentum for the global economy. The nation's shipments arose about, we can say that, 11th month in September, and they were driven by steel, semiconductors. South Korea shipments, they climbed for 11th month in a row. And export surge was steepest monthly jump since 2011. The Trade Ministry expects exports growth could slow down going forward. Imports have gained 21.7% versus expectations of 20.6%. South Korea has registered trade surplus of $13.8 billion this time. The median estimate of economists was for a surge of 25%. Imports have gained 21.7% versus expectations for them to advance 20.6%. The trade surplus was $13.8 billion, as we told viewers. Also, a record month-on-month growth in the exports was the most since January 2011. The better-than-expected data came after China announced its factory gauge hit a 5-year high. Results would also show that South Korea's economy is demonstrating resilience even as the war of words between US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un heightens tensions on the peninsula. Exports have surged across most of 13 major categories. Trade Ministry said South Korea's economy has improved slightly in some regions in the 3rd quarter, with domestic consumption driven by positive sentiment. And staying with Asian news, China's central bank has said it will maintain prudent and neutral monetary policy and use multiple monetary policy tools to keep liquidity basically stable. People's Bank of China, or PBOC, will continue with interest rate and exchange rate reform. PBOC is People's Bank of China. China will use multiple monetary policy tools. And PBOC will try to keep yuan stable. China economy has maintained steady growth after faltering for some time, and economy is confronting a complex economic situation over there. And the People's Bank of China said this in comments on its websites following a quarterly meeting of its Monetary Policy Committee. The PBOC said it will optimize financing and credit structure by promoting direct financing in line with requirements of supply-side structural reform. It will also continue to deepen reform of financial system, improve operating efficiency in the financial sector to better serve the real economy. So while strengthening risk management, the country will further advance market-based interest rate reform and seek improvements in RMB exchange rate formation mechanism to keep the rate basically stable at an appropriate and balanced level. China's economy maintained steady growth but is confronting with a complex economic situation, according to statement. And an initial public offering, or ICO, by Lyft Inc. will give investors a way to jump into self-driving cars, although the ride services company and rival Uber Tech may have to wait years before sending a driverless robotaxi to a customer. Lyft was valued at $7.5 billion in its latest fundraising, while larger rival Uber is valued at $68 billion. So Lyft is valued at just $7.5 billion, while Uber is valued at $68 billion. That's a big difference, but experts say the IPO would give Lyft much needed financial muscle to deal with larger rivals such as Uber, and will also give it an upper hand in scouting and developing new technologies. Reports earlier said that San Francisco-based Lyft is close to hiring an IPO advisory firm as a first concrete step toward becoming publicly listed. Lyft would establish a public valuation for ride services startups that has been elusive. A ride services IPO tests the belief of many auto industry insiders that individual auto ownership will wane as people will sell their cars and rely on mobility services such as ride services, car share, bike share, and self-driving vehicles.
M-City allows us to study roundabouts, which are typically...
And another news from global IPO space, where maker of hit mobile game Angry Birds, Rovio, will look to buy up other players in the gaming industry following its listing last week. The Finnish company's shares got off to a flying start on their stock market debut last week, trading up as much as 7% from their initial public offering or IPO price of around $14. Rovio shares are trading up around 7%. Rovio has more muscle to do deals in gaming sector. The gaming sector is believed to be ripe for consolidation. Analysts have long urged Rovio to do more to reduce its reliance on the Angry Birds franchise. Angry Bird game has been downloaded around 3 billion times so far, and after going through a rough phase earlier, Rovio fortunes are on recovery path after success of Angry Birds movie. And US tech giant IBM, or International Business Machine, has dominated the early decades of computing with inventions like mainframe and the floppy disk. Its offices and factories, stretching from upstate New York to Silicon Valley, were hubs of American innovation then, long before Microsoft or Google came along. But over the last decade, IBM has shifted its center of gravity halfway around the world to India, making it a high-tech example of globalization and its trends that the Trump administration has rallied against. Today, the company employs around 130,000 people in India, about one-third of its total workforce and more than in any other country. The workforce and the plan, it spans the entire gamut of IBM's businesses, from managing computing needs of global giants like AT&T to Shell, to performing cutting-edge research in fields like visual search, artificial intelligence, and computer vision for self-driving cars. One team is even working with producers of Sesame Street to teach vocabulary to kindergartens in Atlanta. The work in India has been vital to keeping down costs at IBM, which has posted 21 consecutive quarters of revenue declines. And beginning with India news, where not a good news for India, and rainfall in its annual monsoon season has been below average and less than forecast, with some crop growing central and northern states receiving less rain than needed, the National Weather Official has said. So monsoon rains were 95% of long-term average, and Indian Meteorological Department has said that monsoon delivers about 70% of India's farm output, and monsoon is critical for farm sector in India. India's farm sector employs around 1.3 billion people, around more than half of country's 1.3 billion people. So monsoon rains were 95% of long-term average, compared with Indian Meteorological Department or IMD's forecast of 98%, marking the fourth straight year in which IMD has overestimated likely rainfall. The monsoon, which delivers about 70% of India's annual rainfall, is critical for the farm sector that accounts for about 15% of its $2 trillion economy and employs more than half of country's 1.3 billion people. India's rainfall was below average mostly because of low rainfall in oilseeds and pulses growing central state of Madhya Pradesh and in the rice growing northern states of Haryana and Punjab, while rice output is expected to be down 2% compared with last year due to better irrigation in the rain deficit northern states. And troubles are mounting in India's telecom sector, where Arcom, Reliance Communications and Aircel, they have called off talks for a possible merger of their respective mobile service operations. Arcom is owned by Anil Ambani, the billionaire, and Aircel Limited, they had signed binding agreements in September 2016 for the merger of Arcom's mobile businesses with Aircel. The parties had signed binding agreements earlier, and regulatory uncertainties and approval delays are behind broken deal. Aircel merger was part of Arcom's strategy to reduce the debt, and Arcom will evaluate opportunities for monetization of spectrum. Arcom has said that. The reason for merger getting called off were legal and regulatory uncertainties and various interventions by vested interests that caused inordinate delays, Arcom said. Delays were caused in receipt of relevant approvals for the proposed transaction. Arcom also said unprecedented competitive intensity in the Indian telecom sector, together with fresh policy directives, adversely impacted the bank financing for this sector. It has also seriously affected industry dynamics, adding the board will evaluate an alternate plan for its mobile business. The merger with Aircel was part of Arcom's strategy to reduce debt. The lenders had agreed to give time for companies to complete the deal by December. Arcom said it will evaluate opportunities for monetization of spectrum holding through trading and sharing arrangements. An IT major, TCS or Tata Consultancy Services, has said a US court has more than halved the compensation and punitive damages demanded from the company to $420 million in a lawsuit filed by Epic Systems. The matter relates to US grand jury order that slapped two Tata Group companies, Tata Consultancy Services (TCS) and Tata America International, with $940 million fine in a trade secret lawsuit filed against them by Epic in April 2016. TCS says an opinion and order has been issued by the Western District Court of Wisconsin in the suit filed by Epic Systems against the company. Partially granting TCS motion, the court significantly reduced the compensation and punitive damages of $940 million awarded by the July verdict in April 2016 to $420 million now, which is more than half. And Finance Minister of India Arun Jaitley has hinted that there is scope for lesser slabs under the Goods and Services Tax or GST once there is revenue buoyancy. In the first 2 to 3 months of GST implementation, currently the GST regime slot items under rates of 5, 12, 18 and 28%. An additional GST compensation cess is also levied on certain products, including SUVs and big cars. Emphasizing that indirect tax burden is borne by all sections of society, the minister said it is always the endeavour of government to bring down tax rates on mass consumption commodities, noting that India has conventionally been a tax non-compliant society. He said when people have the right to demand development, they also have the responsibility to pay what is required for the development. Jaitley also said there are never grey areas in taxation law and it is duty of tax officer to be firm and fair. And over to an interesting story where federal authorities in the US have uncovered a massive fraud operation that was operating out of call centers in India. Authorities say a network of criminals in India managed to steal over $1 billion around the world, and their targets were often vulnerable Indians living in America. WION's Andy Rosgan has a look at how the operation was exposed in a small community.
It started about 3 years ago here in the Chicago suburb of Naperville. Local police were getting a few calls from Indians living in the area who said they had been scammed by a call center in India. The callers pretended to be from America's Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, and told the victims to pay taxes or be jailed. Or the callers would pretend to be from the Customs and Immigration Service and say the victims would be deported if they didn't pay hundreds or thousands of dollars.
They went ahead and did it immediately, and many times they didn't know better and they were being told to do it right now as they were on the phone, and many of the victims did that.
Then the victims were told to get to a big grocery store like Walmart to buy gift cards. Specifically, they were told to buy these kinds of gift cards, prepaid debit cards called green dot cards. Then, after the victims put money onto the cards, they were instructed to tell the Indian callers the PIN numbers from those cards. From there, members of the scam in the United States, called runners, managed to move the funds into various bank accounts and money orders, and the runners would get their cut too.
It is terrible.
Krishna Bansal heads the Indian Community Outreach Center in Naperville. He also got several threatening calls from that Indian call center.
I have tried getting into a conversation with these guys to understand why and what they're doing, and then finally, when they realized that I know what is going on, they backed off completely. And they, in fact, started talking to me in Hindi and Gujarati.
Bansal believes the Indian call centers have access to a database of Indians living in America and know exactly how to scare them and touch an emotional nerve. And the victims he's talked with feel ashamed for falling for it.
Some of these people are not very well-to-do off. They don't have like a lot of savings. They have lost all their savings. And you can imagine, that money was kept for something else. That money was for some kids' education.
At the Naperville Police Department, investigators eventually started to connect the dots with other reports of Indian call center scams around America. The investigation took years, but federal authorities determined that the Indian call center that was harassing Naperville was based in Ahmedabad. And in the last few months, authorities have rounded up about 60 suspects, and several of them have already pleaded guilty. About a dozen Naperville residents lost roughly $88,000 in the scam, but the worldwide theft is estimated at over $1 billion.
This investigation made a significant impact, and this type of scam has slowed down dramatically. So we have made a dent.
Krishna Bansal says he's helping set up a series of community meetings for Indians to teach them how to avoid phone scams in the future. And as for those who already fell prey, well, authorities say they might be able to get some of their money back, but it could take years. Andy Roschen in Chicago for WION.
Let's talk about markets now. Today, markets in India are closed, but global markets are functioning, and Asian markets are mixed. But S&P 500 and Nasdaq, they had hit record highs. So Asian markets are, let's say, they were mixed. Let's talk about the other markets. If you talk about mainly Asian markets, we can see the overall markets in Asia are trending in mixed. Nikkei up 28.53, while other markets, and we can say that Straits Times is also up. We're joined by Lavlesh Sharma, our analyst for this morning. Good morning, Mr. Sharma. Markets in India are closed, but there are many factors that are going to, pave the way for the market going forward in India. What factors should be kept in mind this week?
Hi, very good morning, Sumit. I think there are many factors that will be affecting, especially in October. First is that we have had a weak rollover from the September figure. Secondly, the volatility basically in October, it has been usually mixed. So we may see some either going forward. Thirdly, what's more important for market to watch is repo rate decision by the RBI. So somewhat everything will be eyed on the RBI repo rate decisions, which is expected to be same at 6%. But still some commentary from the RBI because Federal Reserve is on its way in December to complete its rate cut target. So I think all these things will be very important, especially the clues from the RBI and its comments. I think that will be important.
For global market, Mr. Sharma, how will global markets be panning out? What will the big factors to be looked out for?
Right, I think global markets will be looking at, there are few number of data. I think going forward during this week, we are seeing U.S. unemployment claim and ADP non-farm employment change. Apart from that, we'll be heading for FOMC's, speech by Member Kaplan. So I think all these things will be very important for, global markets and take some cues. And what are the growth projections as well. So I think going forward, a lot of cues for markets to look at will be from Federal Reserve. We have Federal Chair, Member Bullard and Yellen speak as well. So I think market will be glued. We may see some kind of a muted sessions on early part of the week. I think the volatility will increase starting on Wednesday.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma, for talking to us today. As we told the viewers, the Indian markets are shut, but globally they are mixed. Asian markets specifically are mixed. That's all today we have in this edition of WION Wallet. For more news and updates, stay tuned to WION, and thanks for watching us.